Under the fluorescent hum of prison corridors, there exists a device that was once introduced as a tool of discipline, but quickly earned a darker reputation. A chair meant not for comfort, but for immobilization, humiliation, and pain. The restraint chair, a metal and plastic throne of control, strapped men and women in so tightly that hours stretched into torment, days became unbearable, and the body itself rebelled against its forced stillness. Inmates who found themselves locked into this device would often describe it as a prison within a prison, a sentence within their sentence, where the cruel design of the apparatus turned punishment into something far more sinister. The chair was simple in appearance, its frame cold and clinical, its straps thick and unyielding. Once a prisoner was lowered into it, guards would bind wrists, ankles, shoulders, and chest, until the body could not move even an inch. The prisoner was transformed into an object, helpless, trapped, and exposed. Official records described it as a means to control dangerous behavior, a method to calm violent inmates who posed a threat to themselves or others. But behind the sterile justifications was a reality of degradation. Prisoners weren't merely restrained, they were left for hours, sometimes days, with no access to a toilet, their bodies forced to betray them as they sat in their own waste. What was supposed to be control became contamination, a slow breaking of spirit through humiliation and discomfort. For many inmates, the physical pain came first. The body is not meant to remain fixed in one rigid posture. After hours, blood circulation weakened in the legs, numbness spread, cramps twisted muscles, and shoulders ached as the straps dug into skin. For some, the restraints cut so deeply that wounds appeared, marks of leather and steel etched into flesh. Swelling became common, and in more extreme cases, blood clots formed, threatening death from within. What began as immobilization quickly turned into suffering, slow and deliberate, the kind that gnaws at the body until the mind itself begins to unravel. But if the body was tormented, the mind was often shattered. Imagine the silence of isolation mixed with the inability to move, breathing shallow because the straps are too tight, head drooping forward because you cannot shift position, the smell of your own waste rising around you. Minutes tick by as eternities, deprived of dignity, of freedom of movement, of control over one's own most basic functions. The prisoners sank into despair. Guards would sometimes taunt them, using the chair as both cage and stage, mocking the very suffering they created. To be strapped in was not just to be punished, it was to be put on display. As a warning, a grotesque reminder of who held power and who had none in certain prisons. The cruelty escalated even further. Reports emerged of the chair being used in combination with electric shock stun devices applied. While the inmate was helpless, unable to recoil, unable to resist, shock waves surged through the immobilized body, leaving burns, spasms, and screams echoing against prison walls. This was not discipline. It was calculated torment. A controlled environment turned into a chamber of pain, where the device itself became an accomplice to abuse. One of the most disturbing aspects was the length of confinement. Official policy might dictate an hour, perhaps 2, but testimonies told of prisoners left strapped for 12 hours, 24 hours, even multiple days, without food, without water, without the possibility of sleep. The body began to shut down, skin breaking into sores, infections spreading, hallucinations clouding reality. Some prisoners were so traumatized after release from the chair that they could barely walk. Their muscles locked, their minds fractured. Others didn't survive at all, their bodies giving out under the strain. Death came quietly, in some cases heart failure, blood clots, or sheer exhaustion, each life lost while bound in an object that pretended to be lawful. The origins of the chair were rooted in the American prison system's obsession with control. In the 1980s and 1990s, as prisons became more overcrowded and tensions between inmates and staff rose, the restraint chair was introduced as a humane alternative to beatings or isolation cells. The rhetoric was thinly veiled, masking the reality that this device didn't remove violence. It simply mechanized it. Rather than fists or batons, the chair itself became the instrument of punishment. It spread quickly across facilities, touted as a technological solution to discipline. But the truth was darker. The chair didn't prevent abuse, it enabled it, institutionalized it, and gave it the appearance of legitimacy. Even within prison walls, whispers of its horrors circulated. Inmates told each other that once you were in the chair, you lost all sense of time. That your body would betray you in ways you couldn't imagine. That you might emerge broken or not at all. For guards, it was a weapon that required no effort. Strap down the inmate, walk away. Let the hours and the body do the work. The very passivity of the device made it more sinister. It allowed cruelty to unfold not through action, but through neglect, pain by waiting, torture by time. The psychological scars left by the chair were often worse than the physical ones. Former prisoners spoke of nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks whenever they sat in a normal chair after release. Some described feeling phantom straps around their wrists and ankles years later, as if the chair had followed them out of prison, invisible but inescapable. Others never spoke of it at all, their silence its own kind of evidence trauma too deep to voice. The restraint chair was not just a device of the moment. It left a residue that lingered long after the straps were undone. It is chilling to realize that this torture was not hidden in secret chambers or medieval dungeons. It happened in modern facilities, in the heart of the United States, under the eyes of wardens and policymakers who claimed to uphold order and justice. The chair was written into manuals, defended in reports, its existence justified as discipline. But no policy, no bureaucratic language could disguise the reality. For those bound within it, the restraint chair was nothing less than a sanctioned method of slow, deliberate torture. The accounts that began to emerge in courtrooms and investigative reports were chilling. Inmates tied into restraint chairs described how their skin would tear against the straps. After hours of struggling, how circulation was cut off to their hands and feet until they swelled and turned purple, and how some lost all feeling for days afterward. Medical experts testified that prolonged use of the chair could cause deep vein thrombosis, a condition that could lead to sudden death. Yet in prisons across America, officers insisted this was not torture, but necessary discipline. Lawsuits slowly piled up, many filed by families who had lost loved ones inside the chair. There were stories of men and women dying of dehydration, their water withheld while bound so tightly they could not even call out. Others suffocated in their own vomit, unable to move their heads. In one harrowing case, a man suffered fatal cardiac arrest after being shocked repeatedly with a taser while strapped down. The chair that was supposedly created to ensure safety was becoming a coffin. Human rights groups began to call out the hypocrisy, while America publicly condemned other nations for using torture devices. Here was a chair, an American invention, being used in broad daylight, inside state facilities. Some liken it to medieval torture racks, only hidden beneath the language of control and management. Former inmates spoke of how the chair left scars not just on their bodies but on their minds. Some said the worst pain was not the physical restraint, but the humiliation of sitting in their own waste, stripped of dignity. While guards laughed and ignored their pleas, journalists who investigated the practice revealed a grim pattern. The chair was often used disproportionately on mentally ill inmates. Instead of receiving treatment, they were strapped down for hours, sometimes days, their psychosis worsening as the confinement broke them psychologically. One expert described it as locking trauma inside trauma. For many, the chair became a place of permanent damage where panic attacks, PTSD, and self-harm behaviors only deepened. Despite mounting evidence, the chair was defended by prison administrations as an essential tool against violence. It prevents harm to staff and inmates, they argued. But the statistics painted a different picture. In facility after facility, incidents of death, serious injury, and legal settlements followed its use. Families demanded reform, demanding answers as to how their children, fathers, mothers, and siblings went into custody alive but left in a coffin after being tied to a chair. Public outrage grew after several high-profile deaths were exposed in national media. Images of the chair, cold and metallic, with wide straps ready to bind, shocked viewers. It looked less like a medical device and more like something out of a medieval dungeon. The realization hit hard. America, a country that prided itself on liberty, had created a torture device in modern times. Legislators promised change, yet many prisons quietly continued to use the chair behind closed doors. The more survivors spoke, the clearer the picture became. Hours of immobility caused nerve damage that never healed. The psychological scars left victims waking in the night, convinced they were still strapped down, and even those who lived never fully escaped the memory of being degraded, mocked, and left powerless by a system designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. Some states began banning the chair, recognizing the cruelty, but others held on. The arguments were familiar. Prisons needed control, staff needed tools, and without it, chaos would ensue. Yet opponents countered with simple truth. Order achieved through cruelty is not justice. It is oppression. The restraint chair became a symbol of the darkest side of incarceration and a miracle reminder that, when unchecked, discipline can transform into abuse and punishment into torture. Today, the legacy of the restraint chair still hangs heavily over discussions of prison reform. It stands as a brutal warning of what happens when human dignity is discarded in the name of security. For some, the chair will forever be remembered as the moment they lost faith in a system that claimed to be about justice but delivered only pain. The stories of those who suffered in its straps are not just historical footnotes, they are living testimonies of the thin line between order and cruelty, punishment and torture. The restraint chair did not just restrain bodies, it restrained humanity itself. If history teaches us anything, it is that silence allows cruelty to thrive. The restraint chair was allowed to exist because too few questioned it, too few looked behind the walls to see what was being done in the name of safety. Only by exposing these dark truths can we ensure that torture does not hide in plain sight. This was the restraint chair, America's hidden prison torture. You're watching Torture's Room, where we uncover the brutal methods and forgotten punishments that history tried to hide. If you found the story eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep these hidden truths alive, because the only way to prevent the past from repeating is to remember it.